Hello and welcome back to Photoshop CS6 for web designers. In this video, I want to talk a little bit more about layer styles. We've already used layer styles very briefly when we created a pattern overlay or a drop shadow behind our layers, but I want to take a look at some of the other layer styles that we have available to us. So again, we have a couple of ways that we can access our layer styles, and I want to add some layer styles to this text layer that I have in this Photoshop document. So I've got the text layer selected here with the layer styles text in it. And again, there's two ways we can get to it. We can go to layer, layer style, and then choose one of these options here. Or the method I prefer is to just double click in this blank area of the layer over here to the right of the layer name. So we'll double click there and that will pop up our layer styles dialog. So let's start at the very top. We have a bevel and emboss option, which I want to encourage you to stay away from as much as possible. Back in the early days of web design, people used to bevel everything, and so that's kind of garnered a bad reputation. Now there are times when it's okay to bevel a little bit. We can tighten up the bevel, make it sharper by changing our technique here from smooth to chisel hard, and that'll give it some hard edges, but then we can bring the depth down, or not the depth, let's leave the depth about where it is. We can bring the size down, and that'll bring that bevel closer to the edge, and it just kind of gives it a crisp look. If we bring that size all the way down to 1, it gives it kind of a crisp look that doesn't look too bad. But there are a number of options you can play with here, and a lot of it is really just experimenting with it and seeing what works for you. You can change the angle of the light. You can have it come from the bottom right or the top left or wherever you want to, just by clicking and dragging around in this little circle here. And then you can change the opacity of the highlights and shadows. You can change the color of the highlights and shadows. And there are multiple options for playing with that. So I want to encourage you just to go into some of these layer styles and just mess around with them a little bit to see what they do. But that's the bevel and emboss option. There's also some contour and texture options associated with that. I'm not really going to get into those. I can't remember a time that I've actually used them in my own work. But those options are there if you want to play around with them and see what they do. So I'm going to turn that off. We also have a stroke option. Now keep in mind that the stroke option adds a stroke to your shape, but it also expands the size of your shape by default. Because when you apply the stroke by default, it puts it on the outside of your shape. So right now it's applying a 3 pixel stroke to the outside of your shape. So again, we're increasing the boundaries of our shape. Now we can change that. We can change our position here from outside to inside, and that actually puts the stroke on the inside of the existing pixels for that layer. So you have a couple of options that you can work with there. I do find myself using the stroke option quite a bit. Usually it's for a very thin 1 pixel stroke to help the text stand out just a little bit. And so maybe instead of a dark black color, we'll have maybe a medium to dark gray color to just help it pop ever so slightly, like so. So that's the stroke option. You can also add an inner shadow to make it look like it was kind of cut out. This is also good for putting like dark edges around the edges of your text. If we bring our distance down to 0 instead of 5, you can see it puts that shadow around all edges of your text. And you can play with the size and the choke in order to change that effect. But again, we're not going to really get into that in detail. I just wanted to show you that it's there. We also have an inner glow, which is the same as the inner shadow. It's just a different type of effect. Instead of darkening the inside, it's brightening it up. You can change the color of that inner glow. If we wanted a bright orange glow for some reason, we could do that and change the size. That gives it kind of a burned out look, but you get the idea. So then we have some other options. I don't really ever use satin all that much, although it does have its uses in some text effects. We also have color overlay, which is a great way to just change the entire color of a layer. So if we click on color overlay, we can then go to the color selector here and just choose whatever color we want to change the color of that layer, and we get instant feedback on what that's going to look like. Now for a text layer, that doesn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense to use a layer style to change the color when you could just go in and change the text color. But you may find instances where it does help to go in and change the color using a layer style. instead of doing it some other way. For example, if you have an illustration of a character and you just want the silhouette of that character and not all the details associated with the character, you could do a color overlay, change it to black, and that'll get rid of all the detail in the pixels, but you'll still have the basic outline or silhouette of the character there, as long as that layer has transparent pixels around it and not like a white background. If it has a white background, then it's going to change the entire layer to black or whatever color you choose, and you won't be able to see it that well. Let's click on cancel there. Let's uncheck color overlay. We also have gradient overlay where you can put a gradient back there. We can click on the gradient tool here and double click on the stops to change the gradient colors. Like so. You might actually find yourself using this from time to time. I know I use it on a fairly regular basis. I'm going to turn that off. We also have the pattern overlay, which we've already looked at. We can overlay anything with a pattern that we've created, like so. I'm going to turn that off. We can also put an outer glow around our shape, which is going to be hard to see when it's on a white background. But for instance, if we have a black background here, and then we go into our layer styles for the text layer, and then we put an outer glow on it, we can actually see that glow show up. So we can bring the size up, maybe change the color. Let's change it to white. And we can see what that looks like. We can change the opacity of it, etc., etc. Okay, and then our last option, which we've already seen, is the drop shadow. We've already gone over that, so I won't repeat that. But those are the basics of using layer styles in Photoshop CS6. So again, they can come in handy. It's important to know where they are and how to get to them, and you'll find yourself using them more than you might think. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video when we start talking about using text in Photoshop.